folks, welcome back for another Feature Friday. I'm your host Ryan Glover, and this week we're going to be learning how to build a settings panel. Now that may not sound like something that's terribly exciting, but one of the things that I like to always keep in mind when I'm building products is that even the kind of third tier features, the things that don't really matter or they don't seem like they matter, I like to give those just as much attention as stuff that people are going to interact with all the time. And the reason why is that that just improves the overall user experience of your product, so that literally any part of the product that a customer interacts with is going to be just as good as any other part. And so what we're going to do is help me to come up with a design for the settings panel for the integrations list inside of Command. So you're going to be able to connect apps like MailChimp and GitHub and Twitter to help promote your product via Command, and we're going to wire up a design for that list so that next week I can dig into the actual implementation of the integrations. So if you're ready, let's get started. Alrighty, so where I'd like to start for this tutorial is actually way back in time. So the reason that I chose to do this week is I'm going to need to actually work on the integrations next week, but I stumbled across an old design that I wanted to use for this. And you'll notice here, so I'm using an app called Sketch that I like to do just rough mock-ups in. So this isn't really a polished mock-up. It just gives me enough information so that I can go to do my design work in code. And you'll notice that this project was originally named Kibble, and then it was named Hound, and then it became Command. So there's been kind of a weird transition to dogs and giving dogs commands and all kinds of silly stuff because of the whole Clever Beagle thing. So what I want to do is take this design that I came up with Lord knows how long ago, and convert it into CSS and components and actually get it on screen in the browser. So what I'd like to do to get started is just get this page on screen. So I don't want to do exactly everything the same, but I do like this panel. So I like having the icon for the brand over on the side, and then the name of it and a little description about what it does, and then just the different states for managing whatever that integration happens to be. So what we're going to do is jump into the code base here, and I'm just going to close a few things up. And I'm going to go into the UI pages directory. And again, if you're just getting familiar with these videos or you haven't watched before, what I'm using is PUP, which is Clever Beagle's boilerplate application that we use with mentees at Clever Beagle. So I'm using that to build Command as well. So this is the exact same folder structure. I haven't really changed anything. So the only difference between this and the copy that you can download from GitHub is that this one has a few extra parts involved, but the actual structure is the same. So what we're going to do is dig into the UI pages directory right here, and I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call this one integrations. Now, the thing that's really easy to do when you're building this stuff is to get worried about specific names and things like that, but something I've learned over the years is to just say, like, pick the most obvious name to start, work with that, and then if you think of something better later, or once you start to merge whatever that component is, so in this case this component in with the application, if it makes sense with a better name, then change it, but otherwise don't sweat it. So what I'm going to do is kind of think ahead. So I know that what I'd like to do is when we have an item in this list, if you click connect, I'd like a modal to come up on the screen. So what that tells me ahead of time, way ahead of time before I write any code, is that I'm going to need access to state. Now, I know some of you are advanced React nerds, and you're probably like, oh, cool, you could use hooks. It's like, I'm not going to use hooks. I could, but I'm not going to because I think I've got an old version of React, and honestly, I don't feel like going into that tar pit. So what we're going to do is just use a good old-fashioned class component. I know. Oh, everybody take a deep breath because we're using the old way of doing things, but I like it, so that's what we're going to do. So what I've got here, and you'll notice that that spit out kind of quickly. So what I just did in my text editor here, inside of, this is VS Code, I've got a bunch of snippets for commonly used components and pieces. And this is something I highly recommend if you're working on a product, is just to take some time and think through what are the common pieces that I'm going to use or write over and over and over again in my application, and spend some time making those snippets. And one site that I really like, and let's jump to the browser here, we'll talk about this in a little bit, is snippet-generator.app. This thing is friggin' priceless. So if you haven't gotten into snippets before, this is an easy way. You can just type something in here, and you'll notice on the right it can format it for one of the 3 popular text editors. So good thing to know about. So what we're going to do is dress this up a little bit. And so I'm going to change the name of this to integrations. And instead of doing that, I'm just going to leave myself a little note here. So let's say integrations so we know what this is. And then we're going to go ahead and save this. And what I typically do is I like to work visually, especially with design stuff. I find it, honestly, it's just easier because you can see it. So what we're going to do is take this simple component that just says integrations, nothing special, and we're going to wire it up to the router. So this is stored in the UI layouts app file. So this is index.js inside of here. And you'll notice that when I open that up, we just get kind of pointed right to the list of routes inside of this component. So this imports all of the page components inside of pup, or in this case, inside of command. And this is just giving me access to all of the components that I want to render as pages in the application. So what I'm going to do is find a nice home here. I'm going to say this is going to go right here for now. So we're going to say import integrations from, and we're going to say pages/integrations. And you'll notice I'm not passing index.js. So if you're not terribly familiar with a Node.js type of environment, the basic idea here is that index.js is implied if we leave it off on the end. So basically what's going to happen is this is going to look for one of 2 things. This is either going to look for a file with capital I integration, so capital I integrations.js, or it's going to also look for that index.js file, which is what we're using, and we can see that over here. So that should get it imported for us. And did I spell integrations correctly? I did. Okay, so what we're going to do is jump down here to our list of routes. And I know that this specific page should only be accessible to logged in users. And you can see here we've got this authenticated component. So this is something that I've built into pup that does exactly what it says. It makes sure that the user is authenticated or logged in before they can access this page. And if not, it'll redirect them to the login page. So what I'm going to do is just let's come in here and we'll just copy this. No, we won't copy that. That's not authenticated. We want this one. So we'll paste this in and clean up that formatting. We are not heathens. And we're just going to call this integrations for now. I might move that later. And then we're just going to type in our component name. So integrations here is identical to integrations up here. So whatever we import here, we can pass as a component right back down here. So now, if everything worked out, if we jump back to our browser, you can see here I've got a copy of command running and working on an exciting new product called Pants. So I'm going to give this a refresh. Hopefully it'll get going here. There we go. And now you can see I've got integrations up here in the navigation. That's really just a placeholder, but it is helpful to have placeholders so you can kind of jump around and then rewire your navigation later. So as we can see, there we go. We've got our component wired up and we are off to the races. So back in the code now, what we want to do is start to organize how we're going to do our styles or how we're going to write our styles. And inside of pup, the tool of choice since a later 1.0 version. I don't remember 1.x version. I think it was maybe 1.6, something like that, is to use styled components. So styled components are a way of writing CSS as React components, which is super neat. So we're going to use that. And one of the things that you'll notice, I popped open the directory right above integrations here so we can see it, is that the organization convention inside of pup is to create a separate styles.js file to hold all of those styled components. So what I'm going to do here is add styles.js as a file to integrations. So this one will be specific to integrations. And I think I've got a snippet. I do! So that was STC. And so this is importing styled, which is the tag that we're going to use, and we'll see how that works down here in just a second. But I'm importing styled components into this file. So even though we're technically authoring CSS, we're doing it in JS. So you'll hear styled components and a few other libraries that do this as writing CSS in JS or CSS in JS libraries. So whenever you hear that, this is what they're talking about. So what we're going to do is, oh, I got to think. So let's jump back to our design real quick. So I see that we've got like, what do we want to call this? Integration panel or settings card, or I like settings panel. Yeah, and something that I like to do, so I'm working on the integrations page, but the word settings panel just came out of my mouth. So what I'm getting at here is that I like this design enough where I could see it being reused elsewhere in the product, totally irrelevant or unrelated to integration. So whenever I'm designing something, I start with the thought, okay, can I make this something reusable? Like super, super duper reusable. So that happens in phases. So right now, I'm just going to do this as part of the integrations page, but I'm going to work as though I'm trying to build something that's reusable. And if I get there, that's great. I can just copy the code out of here later and move it into its own component. But I always like to think that way just to make sure I'm not boxing myself into a corner and I have some nice reusability. So here we're going to do the settings panel, and I'm going to create a style component called settings panel. And what I'm going to do is so here that element's just a placeholder. So I'm going to say style.div. So the way that style components work are that this style tag has all of the built-in HTML elements defined on it. So style.div or like style.li for list item. And what this is doing is it's saying we want to return a component that contains a div. And that div is going to be assigned styles dynamically by style components. And so you'll notice here I'm using capital S settings panel, which may look a little freaky deaky. And so let's get rid of this and make some sense of this. So, and this is just my linter barking at us because I'm not doing a default export even though I have one style. Generally speaking, I'll assume that I'm going to have multiple styles, so I won't change that until last minute. So that's what that's yapping about. So what we're going to do is import this into here. And what I'll do is at the top of my component file, I'm going to import. And again, because this is a named export right now, because I'm saying export const. So if I change this chunk right here to default, it'd be a named export. It'd be a default export. There you go. It'll be a default export, which would mean that I don't have to use the braces to import it. But in this case, because we're going to keep the named version settings panel, we want to take this name and pop it into the braces. And so what we're essentially saying here is because we've given it an explicit name, we need to import it with that explicit name. Whereas if we did a default, we could just import it as pizza or tacos or cats. I don't like cats, but here we are. I like dogs. I don't have a dog, but I'd like to get a dog. Okay, I'm just rambling. Okay, so what we're going to do, we've got settings panel imported here, and the name style component should kind of give you a hint of what's going to happen here. So instead of integrations, I'm just going to render settings panel. And you'll notice that I'm rendering it as a React component. So this is kind of the magic at play here. So even though it may not look like it, the end result of us writing this code is that we're going to get back in return a div inside of a React component. So this returns a React component to us, which is awesome. So we can render that component with the styles that we assign to it, just like we would any other React component. That's it, which is pretty sweet. So I'm going to save this, and right now it doesn't look like anything, and I'm also going to change how I'm rendering it to do it where we're assuming there's going to be children. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it does have children. So what we essentially just did is this part that's lighting up in blue, just the box around everything, that's our panel. So that's what we just created, and now we need to populate it with children. So we've got like the icon, and we've got, I guess you'd call it like header or metadata, and then we've got an action button. So what I'm going to do is start to mock that stuff out. So what I'll do is say, let's call this icon, And you'll notice I'm going to do this as components that don't exist yet. So we're just going to make these up, and then we'll fill in the blanks over in the styles.js file. So I'm going to say, okay, this is the icon, and I'm going to assume this is an image. And that was what that website we saw when I went and showed you the snippet generator was about. We'll get into that in just a second. But for now, I'm just going to put in a placeholder here. So we're just going to say /mailchimp.png. And this path right here, this is a Meteor specific thing. So pup, the boilerplate that we're using to build command, is built on top of Meteor.js, and as part of their conventions, one of the things that they introduce is, so let's pop that back open, is this public directory. So you'll notice that this public directory contains a bunch of image files right now. That's kind of your hint. So what that's doing is it's exposing static assets, so images or documents or whatever you want to share with the public. It's exposing those at the root of the application. So if I jump back to our browser here, if I go to, let's see, logo.png, let's see what this is. So if I do logo.png, there you go. So that was the old name for this, was Hound. And I've still got to do my tidying. So you'll notice that that is at localhost 3000 / the file name. And that's because all of the files in this directory are exposed at that URL. So we'll eventually need to have mailchimp.png in this directory, and then it'll be exposed at that URL. So, and you'll notice here that what I'm doing right now is just hard coding. So one of the things that I love to do when I'm wiring up a new feature, especially from the design perspective first, or the UI first kind of approach, is to just mock it out with test data. So I don't worry about the database, I don't worry about data models or any of that. I'll just come up with a design first and then come back and fill in the blanks with real data once I've got it working how I want. So I'm also going to say, we'll call this, so we've got an icon, we've got, I'm just going to call this header for now just to keep it kind of generic. And I know that I'm going to want to have a title on this, so we're going to reluctantly make that an H2. So I'm going to say MailChimp in this case, and then what was the phrase that I had here? So I'll also copy phrases out of my designs, or just like little snippets of text, so I don't waste a bunch of time. Because again, all I care about right now is just to get the design looking right. I don't care too much about accuracy in terms of what's on screen. I'll worry about that stuff later. So I've got my icon header, and then we have a button in here. So what I'm going to do is import a button from Clever Beagle /fur. So if you haven't been watching these, one of the other things that I'm working on simultaneously, just because honestly it was kind of convenient, is a UI kit to complement pup. So pup is the code level version, but right now by default, when you clone pup for the first time, we're using the CSS framework Bootstrap to give us the design elements that are on screen. And that's been kind of problematic because the versions have changed and there's all sort of weird cross-dependency nonsense. So I said, screw it, let's just design our own UI kit that we control, so that way it's a little easier and more stable for you folks as you're using this stuff and learning how to do this. So what I'm going to do is import the button component from fur, which is the name of our UI library, and that's identical to something like Bootstrap or Material UI. It's just my personal approach, as it were. So I'm going to take that button component and I'm going to smag it down here. And the way that we change the color of that button is through the theme prop. So I'm going to say theme here is, I think I have one called default. Don't hold me to that. And instead of doing that, I'm going to do the same approach we did with the settings panel, is make it so I can pass children, so I can pass it a label. So in this case, I'm going to say connect, which is kind of that default state of one of these settings. So now we need to add header up here as a placeholder, and let's go and jump into styles and get those built. So we're going to say export const, just that quick, I forgot, I think it's icon, which we'll do as a div. And you'll notice that icon was a wrapper around the image, so I like to do that instead of styling the images directly, just for safety's sake, and I'll show you nitpick details about that in just a little bit. So we've got icon, and then we're going to do export const header equals, and I'm going to do this instead of a div. I'm going to do this as an actual, what is that? Semantic header element. And I'm sure there's some nerd who could be like, well, technically that's not semantic, but yeah, we'll let it slide. Yeah, leave me be. Leave me be. Okay. So what we're going to do now, let's save that, and we are going to save this. And just to give this a little bit of panache early on, what I'd like to do is, let's go back so we know where we're at in the app and I don't get confused. So there we go. So now this is reloaded and we can see we've got a pretty janky looking UI, but we've got our stuff on screen, so that's good. So what I want to do now is come over to this website. So this website is incredible. So this is worldvectorlogo.com, and like the name kind of hints, it just has a collection of vector logos for stuff all over the world. I guess that's what they're getting at. And you'll notice here I've typed in MailChimp before I started recording here so I could get a vector copy of the logo. And I want to say, if we go to MailChimp real quick, I think it's the winking monkey now. Oh, that was adorable. Let's do that again. Hot dog. All right, so I guess, yes, we want the winking chimp. Are chimps monkeys? I don't think so. Somebody's going to burn my house down who's obsessed with this stuff and be like, what's wrong with you getting this wrong? This isn't okay. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to download, oh, his name's Freddy, that's right. So we're going to download a copy of Freddy winking. What a time to be alive, folks. And what I'm going to do is, so you'll notice here I kind of instinctively put PNG in. So, whoop, there we go. It just took away our design. Let's get that back on here so we don't lose it. I wonder why I did that. There we go. That's what I was after. I wanted the tab. So what I'm going to do is bring that logo into Sketch, and I'm going to convert it for what we want. Now, in this case, I'm not going to fuss about details right now. So generally what I'll do is I'll convert certain graphics to PNGs just to do it. It's not really a science in terms of performance or anything like that. It's just what I tend to do. But I may change that later. So what I'm going to do is convert this to a PNG. And you know what? I'm just going to leave this alone. We're not going to fuss about this right now. It's not important. So what we're going to do is go into Command. And we're going to open Public. And in this case, we're just going to call this MailChimp.png. We're going to save it. Okay. So now that I've got that, what we should see back in the browser is a winking chimp. How about that? I don't know why, but that sentence sounds racist for some reason. Winking chimp. It's too late. This is what happens when I do these late at night. So let's see here. Now that we've got that, let's start actually doing some design. And then I'll be quiet. I'll stop running my mouth. So that's not true. Yeah, let's design some stuff. So one of the things that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing a design is to do mobile first instead of desktop first. So I used to do desktop first way back when, but I found that as responsive design and mobile design and all that stuff kind of came into focus, or at least became more popular, it made my life a lot harder to start with desktop first. So even though all I've got in terms of a design back here in this mockup is a desktop version, I can kind of guess at what this is going to look like on mobile. So we're going to start there, and I'm just going to kind of fudge the details as I go. So one of the things we're going to do over here is start to make this look like the mockup. So I'm going to say this has got a border of 1 pixel that's solid, and I'm going to use the built-in CSS color variables. So we're not going to see them in here, but as part of Fur, the UI kit that I'm developing, I've set a bunch of global CSS variables for colors, or commonly used colors. So one of those colors is black, and I have a variant called blacklight, which is like a light gray that I'm going to use here. So this, again, is just a CSS variable. There's no frameworky package compiler nonsense going on. It's just a default built-in thing in CSS now. So those variables are defined inside of fur, but I'm going to reference them just directly here off the top of my noodle. So we're going to save that. And now I'm just going to start kind of riffing on this. So I'm going to say, all right, back here in this design, like I'll check, okay, we got 20 pixels of padding around the outside of things. So I'll throw in 20 pixels of padding, and I spotted the border radius is about 3 pixels. So I'll save that. And this is pretty much exactly how I do designs, is I'll just kind of sit here and slowly but surely build it up based on whatever my mock-up is. So here we can see, all right, we've got 20 pixels, but that is a gigantic chimp head, so we're gonna do something with that. And we'll notice that by default, these are all left aligned, which I don't really like on mobile. For some reason, only in a few cases does left alignment look right. At least that's my opinion. So what I'm gonna do is center align this, and I'm also gonna shrink this noodle. So let's go into the icon next real quick. And what I'm gonna do is say, let's give this a max width of, I'm just going to do it as a percentage to start just so I can kind of eyeball it. We'll say max width 50%. And remember, this is the box around the image. So what I can do is target that image tag inside of this icon component, icon styled component back here. So I'm going to say image width 100%, max width 100%. Display block. So what this is doing, let's throw a height auto on there too, just so we don't get burned. And what this is doing, this is essentially making the image responsive to its parent container. So this is going to ensure that the image doesn't take up more than 100% of the max width of 50%. So if we think about that, the div here in the UI currently is taking up 100% of the panel, but with this style, once I save it, it's going to scrunch that panel or that box to 50%, and then the image is going to scale itself automatically within that 50%. And that's a nice way to get responsive images on the cheap. That's actually, I'm guessing that's how Bootstrap and all the other doodles do it. So let's see what we get here. And that's how it's scaled down, but let's tighten that up a little bit more. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of take a random guess here and say 100 pixels max width, because we don't really need a massive icon, we just need to know what is this thing. So let's let this save and see what we're getting. All right, that's still a little big, but I'm just going to keep going so we don't linger, because this is one of the things when I'm on my own, I'll just sit here and just kind of riff on this stuff kind of indefinitely, so I drive myself nuts. So I'm also going to smack a margin 0 auto on the icon component, so that's going to center it inside of this. And actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to use flex. Yeah, we're going to use flexbox for this. We're going to say display flex on the settings panel. So you notice I jumped up to the settings panel, and that's because with flexbox we can set the parent as display flex and tell it how we want to align all of our content in there. So in this case we want to, I think it's called justify content center, so it's going to center justify everything. And then the next thing I'm going to do is start to give this header some styles. So I think it was an H2 and a paragraph tag. So I can do the same thing I did with the image tag down here. So I'm going to spec this out. And let's go back over here and see what this was. So this is 18 pixels, which sounds about right. So I'm going to change that to 18 pixels. I'm going to give it a line height. Usually I'll do my line height, which is the amount of space between each line. So if this name wasn't MailChimp, like really short, but it was something like MailChimp, blah, 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 and it went and started line wrapping, line height is the space between that wrap. So the top line and the bottom line, wherever it starts to wrap. So typically I'll set this to about 6 pixels above, 6 to 8 pixels above whatever the font size is. So in this case, that's 24 pixels. And then let's give this one, what's the font size on that? That's, what do we got here? 16 pixels. So 16 pixels and same exact idea. So in this case, this will be 22, so go 6 above. And then from there, I just eyeball it, depending on what looks right. Oh my goodness. So we can see we actually kind of got close to our desktop version. That's not what I want down here, but that's kind of the neatness of Flexbox, that it automatically starts to space things out, which is cool. So what we're going to do is, actually let me go back to that and think. This is the flex direction problem. So Flexbox loves to do, I think it's called row alignment. So the flex direction by default is row, and we want column because I want these to stack vertically in this case. So we're going to do that, and let's see what we get. I'm hoping we get it because I don't want to have a Flexbox fight. We did. And everything is center, sort of. The parents are centered, but the children aren't. So we can see all that. So I need to tell the header to text align center. Now this is one of those old CSS veteran things that I'm able to see, but you may be like, what the hell is he talking about? So I know that this box wrapping these, the invisible box wrapping those, is with 100%. So I knew that even if it was centered vertically in the box, the parent box, so meaning this outer gray line that we see, I knew automatically that, oh, because it's with 100%, it technically is centered, even if visually it doesn't look like it. So now we can see I text align centered that, and it looks a little more proportionate. So one that's still fighting us is this image. So what I'm going to do to get that to center is I'm going to set, instead of display block, I'm going to say display inline block, which might burn me. And then I'm going to set text align center on the parent icon. Or no, what am I doing? We're doing flex. I'm doing old school stuff. Let's do flex. We'll say display flex on the icon, and then we'll say align. No, same thing. Justify content center. Let's change that back to block. And that should center that. Should. So you can see one of the things that I like to do is just kind of, oh my goodness, it smushed it. So I like to just kind of make things up as I go, especially with CSS. I don't like to try and figure it all out beforehand because it's just honestly kind of nauseating. So what I'm going to do is open DevTools here in the inspector, and we're just going to do this by hand and figure out what the heck is going on. So let me kind of think ahead here. Was it that? No, it wasn't that. All right, so let's fix this up. We're going to take, actually I'm going to do it back over here. We're going to change this display flex. So let's drop that. And I am going to do it the old school way, just to keep us moving here. So I'm going to say text align center display inline block. Let's see if that gets us an unsmushed chimp head, monkey head, monkey, chimp. Fun. Okay, and this is still fighting me, so let's inspect and see here, like, what's going on. Okay, so it's the div wrapping the image that's giving us a fuss. So let's see, justify content center should be working, but it's not doing what I thought it would do. So let me just see out of curiosity. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to use the margin 0 auto. I'm sure there's a purist way to solve that, but typically if I'm not writing a bunch of junky code to get a result, I'll live with it. It's not worth a bunch of hand-wringing. So in this case, let me see, the text line center doesn't matter, so we can drop that. And I'm guessing then, yeah, let's say block on this. Doesn't hurt anything. Okay, so let's switch that back to block for good measure. So we're going to drop this, and we're going to get rid of that. And we've got margin 0 auto, so now we should be rocking and rolling. And this is kind of neat. We can start to see this panel coming together and looking halfway decent. Not bad at all. So let's check on our refresh. Cool, we're all good. And I've been recording for a second. I need to take a sip of a drink and breathe. So this is going to go like, yeah. Okie dokie, we are back in action. So what I'd like to do now is clean up the spacing on this, and then we're going to be ready to go to the desktop. So one of my big things, and you probably noticed it across like the Clever Beagle site and all that, is I like to keep things minimal. Honestly, just because it removes a lot of stress and fighting on my part. So back in the day, I used to come up with these really convoluted designs that needed all this freaky-deaky positioning and all that stuff. And it wasted a ton of my life trying to get that to position. Especially you kiddos today are very lucky, because back in I started designing with IE6 or Internet Explorer 6, and I've probably lost a few lives debugging that friggin' thing. So things have gotten better, but over time I've realized like the less you do, the easier your life is. But you can also make things look really nice with not a lot. So what we're gonna do is tighten up this spacing here. So this is kind of touching his beard. So we're gonna clean that up. So I'm just gonna guess. Now, one of the little pro tips that I have. So this is like one of my secrets. Yes, if I have any secrets. I don't think I have any secrets. But remember that earlier I set the padding. Let's get rid of this inspector because it's driving me crazy. I set the padding on the outer parent box to 20 pixels. So what I just did is I set the gap here to 20 pixels. Now that may seem kind of arbitrary, but the reason I did that is that even though you may not consciously be like, oh, it looks like 20 pixels, your eye subconsciously sees that evenness all around. So that's a great way. Like when you hear the term white space in design used a lot, it's kind of like a fluffer topic. Like you don't like, what the hell does white space mean? So to think about it in more concrete terms, white space is just giving space around all of the elements. And a cool trick is to just naturally make sure all of your spacing is evenly numbered. So if I have 20 pixels here, my eye starts to see more balance or symmetry in this design, which is kind of neat. And it's a super cheap way. Like that took one line of code, not even. And we get this nice kind of smooth looking design. So if you're ever stuck on something like that, that's how you do it. And so here, looks like we're getting some natural margin on that H2. So I'm going to set this to margin 0. I'm going to let the paragraph push up from the bottom. So I'm going to set the margin top on this so that it pushes a gap between these two. And the reason I do that, that's a sneaky trick too, which is there may be situations, I'm kind of guessing here, but there may be a situation where I don't want to have that explainer text. And so by putting the margin top on that paragraph tag, basically what I'm getting away with is if that text doesn't exist, I don't want that gap to exist. So I don't want margin bottom 20 pixels randomly on my title if I don't need it. So that's how I get away with that, is I put it on the child that's in theory optional. I'm guessing here, so that may go away, but good way to do it so that you can be flexible with your design. And the other thing I'm going to do is change the color of that text. So one of the things that I love to do is take advantage of hierarchy in design. So you'll notice that we set this title to 18 and this text to 16. And the difference between the two is negligible, but it's just enough that your eye naturally gravitates toward this more than this. So that's, again, these are all subconscious things with design, but this is telling my eye, oh, this is the important thing, but this is also important because it's just a little bit tinier, but it's just a little bit tinier enough that my eye doesn't latch onto that first. It latches onto the bold text that's slightly bigger. Look at that. That's $1 million tip right there. You can write me a check. I'll take it. Address is on the website. All right, so what I'm going to do is lower this to, I'm going to say black medium. So again, that's one of the variables that's built into fur. So I have like black light is the lightest, black medium is like semi-opaque, and then I've got black, which is fully opaque. So we're going to do black on this because by default that was just the default browser black, but I want to make sure it matches my theme because I'm an auteur. So let's save that, and should be looking close, relatively close, at least close enough for us to push to the desktop. Yeah, that's actually a little bit too dark. So what I'm going to do is change it. I'm going to swap these. I'm going to say black there, and then I think I do have black dark. At least we're going to find out. Even if I don't, we'll just kind of wing it. I'm also noticing that that gap there between those two is kind of excessive. Yeah, I do have black dark. So that looks a lot better. So I talked about sizing for hierarchy, but you'll also notice I changed the color. So this is a little bit lighter than this. So all of those things come together to make it super easy for your user's eye to gravitate toward the primary and then the secondary. So that's I mean, that's pretty much design in a nutshell, is just making sure that you're familiar with the hierarchy as well as your white space being even. And yeah, you probably ask for a pretty fat paycheck knowing just those few things. So yeah, let's clean that up, because and you know what, this is something I'll also do. So in addition to just debugging CSS, I'll also do, I guess I call it like tightening the screws. So I'll come in here and I'll just eyeball what I want this to be, so I don't just keep guessing. So I'm just gonna keep, so that's 10, what's 5 look like? That's too much, so let's just do 10. And you'll also notice that my numbers are, I don't know what I want to say divisible, but I try and keep it even. So 10 is half of 20. So all of these are evenly ratioed. So yeah, half of 20 is 10. So I'll make sure and try and get things as close as possible in those ratios. Because again, all subconscious, but there's a reason that that looks nice to your eye, and it's because those numbers are even. So if I change this to like 7, it doesn't look bad, but something's not right. Those pro tips, man. All right, so that is looking a lot better. So let's commit that to code, and we're going to say right here, margin top 10 pixels. And now this is actually pretty money. I'm not too fussy at this point about how this looks. So what we can do now is move up to the desktop. So you'll notice if I start to stretch my window, this starts to look kind of gaudy. And it starts to look gaudy pretty much. So this is about I think this is tablet breakpoint. So why don't we say at the tablet breakpoint, which I think is 768 pixels, let's start to migrate toward this design where we've got it kind of evenly across the row as opposed to stacked. So what we're going to do is come back in here and let's check the sizing of this icon. So it's like 50 by 50, it's off a little bit. Let me think that one through. All right, let's do the easy thing first. So the easy thing here is that we can use Flexbox to go back to that position. So what I'm going to do is inside of Settings panel, which again is the parent, or this gray box around everything, we want to change when, and you'll notice I'm using this freaky deaky tag at media, and I'm saying at media screen min width 768 pixels. So if you've never seen this before, this is known as a media query, hence the name at media. So a media query is saying when the browser matches this section or matches this rule, do this. Essentially what we're getting at. So you'll notice I nested this inside a settings panel. So I'm saying I want the settings panel to look like whatever I write inside of here at min width 768 pixels. And I'm saying when the media is a screen, so that could be one of these doodles, that could be my laptop, it could be a desktop, whatever, just something that identifies as a screen in the user agent of the browser. So we're going to say when we're looking at a screen and the min width of that screen is 768 pixels, we want to, and in this case I'm going to say, I know that display flex is already on there, so I can just change what I want to change, which are these two characters. So I'm going to say, I do not want it to be justified to the center anymore. I want it to be flex start, which if you've done CSS in the past before all this Flexbox stuff, that's like a float left in this case. So the start of whatever the box is. And then I'm also going to go back to the default of flex direction row. And we're just going to take a look and make sure I'm not totally wrong. Should be close. It should actually look like what it did when we started. Get out of there. Yeah, so not bad. But we'll notice we've got some discrepancies here. So what I'm going to do, now that we've got a little more real estate on the bottom of the screen, I'm going to mount that back. And we're going to go to, okay, so right there is where our breakpoint is. And let's just start to get an idea for what's going on here. So we can see that this margin auto is burning us at this breakpoint. So if I take that off, it does go back to the side. Like we want it flush with that 20 pixel gap on the side. So we need to get rid of that. So let's do that first, because I will forget. And then we want this header text to be, I'm going to say, not text align center, text align left. So, and now you'll notice I just made a big mistake. So I took margin 0 auto off of icon, which means that that was no longer going to apply down here. So again, I got to be careful. So I want to use this media query again in the icon as well. And so in this case, I'm going to say right here, margin 0, delete those because those don't need to be in here. So that margin 0 is getting rid of the auto, and the auto is what centers it on the left and the right. So it's saying automatically set left and right to auto, and then 0 here. So this is saying set the top and bottom to 0 margin, set the left and right automatically, or center them. So this by 0 is basically saying make every edge, so top, right, bottom, left, 0. So it's not going to center it or do anything goofy. So that gets us that, and then let's text align left this header. So let's make sure we don't forget our media query, and we're going to say, okay, text align left that turkey. And what else is going on in here? I got to see it. This is what I was getting at by visual stuff. So sometimes I get lucky and I can do this stuff just in code and get it pretty close, but sometimes it helps to just see it as I go. So now I can see that, okay, this button is a little bit of a doodle. So let's push that over. And the way that we do that is, well, now this is interesting. So that button is a component coming from fur, so that's not a styled component. So we don't have a styled definition in here. But because it's a direct descendant or direct child of the settings panel style component, what I know is that that button has a class from fur called fur button. And I guess in this case, since we're using the default, it should be called fur button default. We can check that real quick. So that's one of the nice parts about style components, is that if something has a class name, you can still reference it. So yeah, we've got fur-button default. So I can target that inside of settings panel here. So I can say inside of here, so again, this is our box to say only when the screen is 768 pixels wide or greater. We want to style fur button default. So I know that inside of Flexbox, if something is on the end and I want it to anchor itself to the far right, or a float right, we're trying to simulate a float right like we would have done back in the day. We're going to put margin left auto. So the left edge of the element is going to automatically fill or expand whatever space is between it and the next element to the left. So that should shove it over to the right or generate the same effect as a float right. Hopefully, it should look pretty close. Yeah, look at that. Right to the side. So the other thing we'll notice is that we still got our margin on our header, and these two are smushed together. So what I could guess here, how dare you, Ryan? So this design, will notice that there's a 21 pixel gap between the icon and the header here, but we want that to be even 20, because again, we want that spacing to be even. So what we're going to do is actually change this. So instead of margin 0, I'm going to put a margin right. So the way that this works is you have a couple different variations of how you can set your margin. So you can set it explicitly. So you can say margin top, margin dash right, margin dash left, margin dash bottom, or you can use this shorthand. So instead of 0, I'm going to say top 0, and then I want the right to be 20 pixels, and then I want the bottom to be 0 and the left to be 0. So this is forcing a 20 pixel margin on the right side of our icon. So that's going to scoot the header over, so we don't have to worry about that. And while I'm here, I'm also going to get rid of this margin top 20 pixels on the header at this screen size too. So I'm just going to set that to margin top 0 pixels. And so what that should get us is everybody should be at the top of the box, but we should have some decent spacing between everything. Let's make sure that's true. Yes. So now what I want to do is get all of these to center vertically. And this is where, again, Flexbox saves the day. So what we can do here is, I believe this one is, so notice again, I'm on the settings panel because I want the parent to control this. I'm going to set align dash items to center. And that should get everybody automatically centered. So the tallest child in the parent is going to set the height and then all of the other items, yeah, there we go, are going to set vertically relative to whatever that element. So in this case, we have this massive friggin' chimp head here. So let's scale that down. And what did I say? Min width. So I'm just going to go, whoop. That's too small. Let's get it kind of like even. So one of the things I'll do, if you're on a Mac, this is super convenient. So if you hold down Command-Shift-4, you get the screenshot tool. But what's neat about that is it works as kind of like a crosshair measurement tool. So what I can do is kind of see here, okay, I've got like 48 pixels is the height that I'm trying to hit. And that's about right. So it looks like this image, it's got like a weird margin on the top. I don't know why. Yeah, it's not like the image has anything on it. Let me check that header real quick, just make sure I didn't miss something. No. Oh, the header has, so the paragraph tag has a margin bottom that we didn't clear out. So let's get rid of that. And that's a weird one, but whenever you have something with a margin bottom and it has siblings, it's going to force the height of things to be off. So what we can do is clear that out. So I'm just going to say margin bottom 0. And now it's going to look goofy, but what did we have that at for? I forget. 46 pixels. And we know that height is roughly 48 pixels. So now, if we scale this back down manually again to about 48, we should see it line up pretty friggin' well. Yeah, much better. So now if I measure this, the edges should be pretty friggin' close to each other. Yeah, not bad. And typically, like visually, even though you can't see it, like it looks pretty even that way. So it's like 2 pixels bigger than the actual header text. But we could scrunch it down and just kind of see. And you'll notice like the proportion starts to look a little bit weird. So I'm going to leave that at 48 just so it visually looks good. And so now we'll notice if I go to the desktop, hot diggity dog, this is looking pretty close to our design. And that's something I like to do. I don't like to get it 100%. So usually I'll just eyeball it, and I can see now that like, okay, this looks halfway decent, but I don't like this paragraph spacing on desktop. It looks a little bit funky. So I'm going to eyeball that down to 5. For some reason that looks a little bit cleaner. So again, we're going to come back over here, and at 768 I'm going to set that paragraph to I just did it. Margin top, 5 pixels. There you go. All right. And with that, this should be looking pretty decent. And we are ready to move over to our modal. So we're gonna take another break and we're gonna jump into that. Let's see what we get. Oh no. Oh, I didn't set the height. So no, you don't deserve a break yet. You don't get to take a break if you're not gonna do your work correctly. So we want max width, what was it, 48 pixels. All right, come on, need a breather here. I gotta chill out. Let's see what we get. Money, alrighty. Let us continue. So, we've got a pretty respectable design going here. Let's check. I think I broke, yes I did. I broke the mobile version here. So let's jump back to our code. And what we need to do is, where is that? Ah, see, I was trying to be clever and that margin bottom thing burned me. So what I'm going to do is put a margin bottom on the header as opposed to that paragraph tag. And let's see, hopefully that doesn't mess up. Actually, I'm going to think ahead here. So I only want that margin bottom on mobile, so I'm going to get rid of it once I get to the tablet screen size. So let's make sure that works. If you're curious about my wallpaper, I highly recommend the documentary Free Slow. It's about this guy, Alex Honnold. He climbs mountains without ropes. And here I think this is in Angola. So he's a few thousand feet up, and there are no ropes to be seen. He's just barehanding that one. Thought that was a nice wallpaper. Okay, so that looks a lot better. So let's doodle this over and, oh, duh. Margin bottom 0. for the header on desktop. So now that should look back to what we had here. So at this point, there we go, looking a lot better. So let's scrunch it, looking good, looking pretty pro. So the next thing is the modal. And this is where I think I'm going to leave us. So we are going to build the modal and get it to show up, but I'm going to kind of rush through that one, which fortunately is aided. There's a modal component inside of fur that we can reuse, so I don't have to build that whole thing from scratch, which would be a little upsetting at this point in the evening. So let's do this. Let's jump back over to our component, and what I'm going to do is create our modal as a separate component, and then we're going to import that into our integrations panel here, because we only need one modal technically for all of these different settings, because we can just pass to the modal when we open it, hey, here's which integration we're trying to configure, which is the whole point of that modal. So what I'm going to do inside of the UI components directory, I'm going to call this manage integration modal. Yeah, that's pretty serious. So let's do index.js inside of there. And no, that's pretty smart though. I'm pretty impressed by the snippets inside of VS Code. I want to say no, I haven't done this yet. So we're going to do this component essentially from scratch. So I know that this is going to need, it's probably going to need state, so I'm going to do a class again. And that's something I tend to do, is if I know it's going to need lifecycle methods and state. Now, yes, I know about hooks. If it's going to need those, then I'll use a class first. And then if I don't think it's going to need that later, I'll just refactor it down to a functional component. So what do we call this? Manage integration modal. And just to be a little bit lazy, there's nothing wrong with this either. What I'm going to do, I think it's the version modal. It's the simpler one in terms of markup. Is that true? Oh, you burned yourself, kid. All right, well, at least I can get some kind of a hint about the structure. So this is a styled component that wraps around the modal inside of fur. But this is the stuff I care about. So as long as I got that, and those are just the default props for the modal, we should be in business. So yeah, let's replace this fragment. So let's import it. So I can stop clicking around like a doofus. And say modal from Clever Beagle fair. There you go. And let's convert this doodle to modal. And there you go. And so, kind of giving ourselves some hints here. So we've got this handle close modal function that we're going to need to define. So I'm just going to jump ahead and spec that out. We'll worry about the particulars on that later. Which in this case I kind of can think ahead, so I know that there's going to be an on-close prop passed to this component that we're going to need to have, which is literally what do we do when we want to close it. So I'm going to say on-close, and just to be safe, I'm going to say if on-close is defined, even though I'm pretty certain it should be, we'll call to that function that will pass as a prop. Let's smack that into our prop types here. So I'm going to say that's a func. Okay, so we've got some modal props, that's there. Mask opacity is how dark the modal overlay is on screen. So in here I'm going to say modal dot, say I don't even remember my own design kit, how it's structured. What is it? Yeah, modal dot body. Is that right? So it goes inside the modal. Yes. Okay, so we got modal dot body. And let's just start with that, because we don't really care about particulars right now. Again, we're just going to get this modal to open and then call it a night. So we're going to say manage integration settings here. And as we're kind of approaching the end here, we're not all the way there, but do let me know if this stuff is interesting, because I don't mind doing the code that much, but I find this design stuff to be pretty interesting, and I found that a lot of design tutorials online are pretty limited in terms of scope, or they only give you the rough details. They don't show you like the granular details. So if this is interesting, please let me know in the comments, or send me a tweet or something like that, and I'd like to know. Okay, so we've got our basic modal here, and so we missed this. So open is a prop that this modal component needs to tell itself whether or not it should display on screen. And the reason why is that technically the modal component is always on screen. It's just hidden using CSS. So when we change that modal prop to open, that tells the CSS to reveal the modal on screen. So what we're going to do is pass an open prop down to this component. So by this component, I mean manage integration modal. So this is going to be rendered back here, and we'll do that in just a little bit. So let's also add open to our props, our prop types. So we're going to say open is a boolean or a bool. So we've got our bool, and I think that should get us where we need to be in terms of just getting this to pop up. So back in our integrations, what I'm going to do is import this component from, is that the right path? VS Code, tell me if I'm crazy or not. No, that's not. So I'm in the pages directory, so I need to go up. And that's always a nice hint in your text editor. It'll kind of tell you as a sanity check whether or not you're on the right path, because if it starts to autocomplete, you know you are. If it doesn't, you're not. So in this case, that should be correct. You know what? I didn't fully sanity check that. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so then again, I'm assuming that there's an index.js there, and so is JavaScript. It's going to assume that this resolves to an index.js file inside of a folder with that name. So now that we have our component in here, we can slap it in, and back here we know that we need to provide an onClose prop right there, and we need to provide an open prop to tell it what's going on. And you may be wondering, actually, right here, I didn't really explain this. So the reason that I didn't just pass onClose down here directly is because typically inside of a modal that's going to be managing a form or interacting with the database or anything like that, there's usually some cleanup to do. So what I'll do is I'll do that cleanup inside of a handle close modal, and then I'll call to the close to actually hide the modal. So it's kind of like two parts. It's like clean everything up, then visually close it on screen. So that's why I did it in that pattern. So what do we got here? Let's space this out. So we're going to say open is equal to this.state.show manage integration modal. And so that's me guessing. I just know that we're going to need to, on the integrations panel state, we need a way to manage whether or not the modal is currently visible based on what we click on here. So if I click connect, or if there's one that already is configured to change the settings on it, I need to be able to tell that modal, hey, you need to show up from this integrations list. So that's going to be handled by state. So we're going to say this modal is open, or its prop open is set to true if show manage integration modal on state of the integrations component is true. Whew, that was tough to get out. All right, and we need an onClose. And this one, I'm going to say we'll do it as a method on this component. So we'll say this.handle close integration modal. So up here, I'm going to say handle. Are you yelling about my semicolon? No, you're yelling because I haven't completed this. So the default for this is going to be false. So handle close integration modal. I'm going to define this with an arrow function so that our this value inside of the function body gets bumped up a level, or it gets bumped up to the React component instance. So that's a nice way to avoid having to do the whole bind thing in your constructor, which is nice. So here I'm going to say this.setState. And I already know what I want from this, so I'm just going to take this and go func. So this is saying set show manage integration modal to false, or basically this is going to set to false, and because we know that's set to open, open on the modal component is going to become false, so it's going to hide it. So that is looking good, but the only thing that's missing is a way to open it. So we're going to say onClick. And we're going to do a very similar pattern to the close. So we're going to say handle open integration modal. Get that camel hump in there. And we'll fix our linter, make that happy. So this is exactly the same, so I'm just going to go. And logically, I tend to try and keep stuff in order of like logical order, so like open before close. So I'll put my open method above, and then I can just do that for now. So barring any total chaotic things, we should get what we're doing here. We should be done for this tutorial, which is pretty cool. We got a nice little, actually no we're not. We got a little design thing I want to show you. So let's see, what do we get? Blammo! We got a nice modal there. So now if I click connect, we can come into here. So what I can do now, and I may do this in a feature video, maybe I'll do this next week if it's not too convoluted, but what we can do now is tell ourselves, okay, we clicked on the connect button for the MailChimp integration. So actually, let's do that real quick because it'll be nice for you to see it. So what I'm going to do is change this up, and the reason I'm doing this is so that the onClick function is only calling, or it's calling as a, it's kind of like a proxy. So what this is doing is it's saying onClick, call this function, and then that function inside of its body is going to call handle open integration modal. So the reason I do that is if I left it like this, we'd ultimately be calling handle open integration modal as soon as this element renders or as soon as the component renders, so it'd create an infinite loop which would burn you pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is say only call this function when onClick is actually clicked. So what I'm getting at here is we can tell ourselves what integration we're working with. And here I know it's MailChimp. So in this case, I'm going to hard code this just as an example, but down the road, I'll probably have a loop where I'm going to loop over the different integrations that are available in the app, and I'll just put like the ID value here, so like the underscore ID from the database, and use that as my reference. So what I'm doing, so I'm saying handle open integration modal, and I'm going to pass this as, I'll just call it integration for now. Don't need to fuss about it too much. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to set that on to state. And then up here I'm going to provide a default for that of null. So this is literally the integration we're currently trying to manage. And I can pass that as a prop down to manage integration modal. So literally tell the modal what it's trying to manage. So now I can say this.state integration. And internally, and again, this is just for demonstration. This is going to evolve quite a bit over the next week or two here. So I'm just going to print this out here so we can kind of see that flow and you can get a feel for your own work how to do this stuff. So I'm going to say this is a string. That's how it's coming through. So now this is kind of neat. We'll be able to see. And what I'll do, just to make sure this is clear, let's duplicate this. And I know the other integration I'm going to have is GitHub. So we'll say connect a doodle do. How about that? And here we'll just pass GitHub, and then that'll give us a clear separation. And that also plays into the design thing that I wanted to show you. So let's let this refresh here. And all right, so we've got two MailChimps, and again, I'm not going to worry about the icon right now. But what we'll notice is if I click this one, it doesn't show it. Why doesn't it show it? What did I get wrong? So yeah, integration. Get up here, integration is null. This.props integration, state integration. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I have something to spell there. Whatnot. Let's see if I got a console there. If not, we'll just say it's a dud of a party trick. It should be working. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm not gonna fuss too much with this one. Open integration, pass that as a string, set that on the state. All right, now I'm just kind of curious. So when I run into situations like this, something I'll just do, I'll see like this.state. I'll just log the whole state object. So the reason I'm doing this here is because I know that set state calls are going to trigger. Oh, I just answered my own question. So because these two look nearly identical, I put the setting of the integration on the close, not the open, which is backwards. So let's move this up to here, and now we should be in business, so we can get rid of that. And so while we're waiting, the thing that I wanted to show you for the design is you'll notice these two are kind of smushed together. So we want to fix that. So now, there we go. We got MailChimp. Yeah, GitHub. So that's how you just tell yourself what you're currently interacting in like a parent context with a modal or something like that. And that would work too if you're going to a new page, which is kind of nice. So let's fix this, and then we're going to call it a night because I'm getting kind of tired. So the thing I want to do is in the settings panel. So, and this is for both mobile and desktop, so this applies to both. So what I'm going to do is write a rule here, and the nice thing about styled components is it gives you SAS style selectors. So this and symbol is saying for the settings panel, and when that settings panel is not, and this is where our rules come in, so we're going to say when that settings panel is not the last child, meaning when it's not the last child or last element inside of this list, what I want to do is set a margin bottom to 20 pixels. So literally every element in this list except the last one is going to get a margin bottom of 20 pixels. So let's see if that works. It should work. Good old, yeah, there we go. So that just gives a nice separation so we don't think they're related or anything like that. And if we grab from our integrations list, we'll just smack one more panel in here. And I'll show you what I mean so it's not confusing. But that'll just give it a nice gap between each one. You'll notice I defaulted to 20 pixels for that measurement too. And that honestly looks a little bit big, so what I'm going to do is scale that down. So I'm going to say 10 pixels. Again, we want to keep it, that measure relatively even, or that ratio even. Don't ask me what the technical name is because I don't know, but it works. There we go. Not too bad. So we've got MailChimp, GitHub. And we'll notice those two get 10, and we can't really tell. But if I inspect that last one, so you'll notice that orange or peachish line is the margin on this. That has 20, or that has 10. That has 10. That one has 10. And I can explain why. So unfortunately, the last child selector in CSS, and I'm gonna worry about this later. The last child selector in CSS is the last child of the parent. So in this case, our parent is for grid container, and we've got element, 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 element. So this modal, even though we don't see it on screen, this is technically taking on that last child selector, which we don't want. So this current setup doesn't work. So one way I can get around that, just so I don't leave you with a cliffhanger, is I can take this and make the modal go on top. It's not exactly how I like it, so I'll probably end up solving that a little bit differently later. But because this is no longer the last element in the parent context, now we should get what we're expecting, which is that last panel is going to remove its margin bottom. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So, beautiful. That's a pretty good feature Friday, if I don't say so myself. So, with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. As always, make sure that you subscribe. I've seen a lot of you folks subscribing, which is super encouraging, which I love. So please do that. So that's right down below in the video. Click the red subscribe button. And also right to the side of it, click the bell if you want to get notifications as soon as these are launched. And that's a really good way to stay on top of these and keep improving and seeing what I'm up to and learning, just getting better. So, yes, that was designing a settings panel, at least the basic version of it. So, signing off for the HMS Beagle. I'll see you next week, folks. You just listened to me run my mouth for the better part of an hour about a bunch of really technical code. So why not commemorate that experience by watching another tutorial and having an absolute psychological meltdown?